Hello everyone, I'm Jack Fisher and welcome to my world. And let me start this video off by saying something I hope isn't too political. I'm a proud American. I really do love my country. And I genuinely want it to be the best it can possibly be. I often find myself saying that every 4th of July or Memorial Day, and I never intend for it to be an overly political statement, nor do I attempt to push my personal politics onto anyone else. But sadly, patriotism has become exceedingly overly politicized over the course of my adult life. These days, saying out loud that you love America is often conflated with saying, I blindly support America all the time and hate anything or anyone that's definitively not American. Now let me make one thing clear. I think that's absurd, hateful, demeaning, and just downright insulting. On top of that, I also believe it's decidedly un-American and that it runs contrary to some of its highest values. Because I don't care what these phony patriots claim. Loving your country does not mean making excuses for it. Now, I freely concede that the United States of America has done some objectively deplorable things in its history. It even includes outright atrocities like slavery, Japanese internment camps, and the displacement of Native Americans. Those are all terrible stains on America's history. And we should not ignore them, nor should we downplay the lingering effects they've had. Again, none of that should be a controversial thing to say to any proud American. But sadly, there are people out there who treat acknowledging past mistakes as a direct insult on themselves and their country. And it's not. I want to make that abundantly clear. But to those same people, as well as the rest of my fellow Americans, I'd like to offer something that I hope will put things into perspective. And it involves the Founding Fathers, a group of individuals to which many Americans owe their lives, their freedoms, and their identity. Now, I know referencing the Founding Fathers can be a bit tricky these days. Some Founding Fathers are a lot more glorified than others. The success of the Broadway play Hamilton is proof enough of that. But as influential as these men were, they were still fallible men. And they certainly had their share of flaws. It's no secret that most of the Founding Fathers owned slaves. That is an indisputable historical fact. Most of them were also wealthy, educated elites who could not readily relate to the poor or working class. That too is an indisputable historical fact. And yes, some of the Founding Fathers were outright assholes. And that's really not too hard to surmise based on both their words and their actions. Again, this is all basic history. But it doesn't take away from the good things that these men achieved. We may not like them as individual people for how they conducted themselves. And regardless of how you feel about America's past, it's hard to overlook how impactful certain individuals have been throughout our history. And while you can rightly criticize plenty of Founding Fathers for their positions as well as their hypocrisy, you can also make the case that some were indeed ahead of their time. Some of them would even fit right in the current political scene and in a good way. And, as it just so happens, one of those men happened to be my favorite Founding Father. His name is Thomas Paine. If you're at all familiar with early American history, you've probably heard that name. He is not an overly obscure figure. He might not have been president, and he might not have been the subject of a hit Broadway play, but he is a Founding Father that I believe every American can and should be proud of. For one, he was the author of Common Sense. And it is impossible to overstate just how important this work was for America's path towards independence. In my opinion, it's right up there with the Constitution and the Declaration of Independence. If you haven't read it, I strongly suggest that you do. I'll leave a link in the description. It's only 47 pages, but Thomas Paine makes every word count. And the points that document makes are as relevant today as they were in the 1700s. You see, unlike many of the other founding fathers, Paine did not come from a world of wealth and privilege. He came from a family of tenant farmers. He actually had to work for everything he gained. He also had to struggle a great deal to gain the power and influence he ultimately had in America's early days. But that didn't deter him. And politically, Paine was also quite radical for his time. Not only did he never own any slaves, he was one of the few founding fathers who vehemently opposed slavery. When he argued for individual liberty, he wasn't just arguing for his fellow white men. He meant it for everyone. And on top of his more egalitarian views, he was also deeply distrustful of organized religion. He foresaw how it could corrupt politics if it were allowed to mingle with government. In his book, Age of Reason, he once said this:
"All national institutions of churches, whether Jewish, Christian, or Turkish, appear to me no other than human inventions, set up to terrify and enslave mankind and monopolize power and profit."
Today, that almost seems prophetic. But Paine saw the danger in the 1700s. And many years later, the rise of the religious right and right-wing reactionaries has only vindicated those criticisms. It wasn't just about misguided adherence or how politicians might pander to them. He saw religion and government as similar in how they become corrupt and oppressive. One uses law, the other uses theology, but the results are the same. And on top of such forward-thinking views, Paine was also an early proponent of the modern welfare state. Despite what some libertarians may claim, Paine was a vocal advocate of the government actively helping people. While he often saw government as a necessary evil, he understood that if it did not provide for the common people, then it would doom large swaths of the population to poverty. He certainly didn't expect big businesses or rich landowning interests to fill the gap. There was just no profit in doing so. He also saw what could ultimately happen to a country which had a massive wealth gap, such as 18th century France. It tended to lead to chaos, violence, and revolution. And he believed that, in the interest of maintaining order as well as liberty, the state must ensure the common people had some means of supporting themselves. In his book, Agrarian Justice, Paine even advocated for an early form of universal basic income. Today, that position still seems quite radical, but it's an idea that has steadily become more and more mainstream in recent years. And if it ever does come to pass, it'll be yet another case in which Thomas Paine was ahead of his time. But despite all his foresight, it's somewhat tragic that Paine died in poverty. It's also a shame that he isn't held in higher regard compared to other founding fathers. Even though most American students know his name, he's not on many monuments, and his face isn't adorned on any major currency. Now, some of that is his own fault. Thomas Paine made quite a few enemies later in his life. He even turned against some of his former friends, most notably George Washington. He was seen as a controversial figure at the time, even after the American Revolution. But in the long run, history has shown that his ideas and his principles were very much in line with America's ideals. And today, those principles are more relevant than ever. In many respects, the America that came from the Revolution was incomplete, and not just because it retained slavery. It's true that the early American Republic incorporated some of Thomas Paine's ideas, but not nearly enough in the grand scheme of things. But despite that less than perfect start, America is still working towards those ideals. Yes, there have been setbacks along the way. I like to think that the America of today is closer to the vision of Thomas Paine than it was when he died. We were able to end slavery. We were able to build a robust welfare state. We were able to become a more egalitarian nation overall. There's still plenty of work to be done, but Thomas Paine helped lay that foundation. We all just took a while to build atop it. And that's why I encourage all my fellow Americans to take the time to learn about Thomas Paine and how he influenced this country in so many meaningful ways. Doing so is what helped make him my favorite founding father. It also helped give me hope that America can continue to grow and be better. In closing, I like to offer what I feel is one of his best quotes. In his pamphlet, The American Crisis, he wrote this to inspire the soldiers serving under George Washington.
These are the times that try men's souls. The summer soldier and the sunshine patriot will, in this crisis, shrink from the service of their country, but he that stands it now deserves the love and thanks of men and women. Tyranny, like hell, is not easily conquered. Yet we have this consolation with us, that the harder the conflict, the more glorious the triumph. What we obtain too cheap, we esteem too lightly. It is nearness only that gives everything its value. Heaven knows to put a proper price upon its goods, and it would be strange indeed if so celestial an article as freedom should not be highly rated.
If that doesn't rouse your American spirit, I don't know what will. Thanks for watching, everyone. And thanks for joining me in my world. Please remember to like, comment, and subscribe. And until next time, take care, stay safe, and God bless America. Please.